Hello, I'm Valerie Carter. I am a recreation therapist at the Manchester, New Hampshire VA. Um, and I am here with Dr. Adam Ingrayo to share with you about exploring Hives, the Honeybee Initiative for Veterans Empowerment and Support, and what is involved in a therapeutic beekeeping program. So I'm going to put a poll in the chat, and I just ask you to respond to the poll telling us what it is that motivated you to sign up for the webinar today. You may select multiple answers if you would like, and it should be in the chat now. It says it's live, so we're going to go with it, and then we will get started. I will do introductions in just a moment, but just so you know where you are, and hopefully you are where you expected to be. But by the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to understand what is needed to implement a successful therapeutic beekeeping program, list some of the specific equipment, skills, and knowledge that you'll need to facilitate the program, and then identify the benefits and the outcomes of facilitating one of these therapeutic beekeeping programs. So like I said, my name is Valerie Carter. I am a certified recreation therapist. I have been facilitating the Hives program at the Manchester VA since 2019. And co-presenting with me today is Dr. Adam Ingrayo, and I'm going to allow him to introduce himself.
Thanks, Valerie, and thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Adam Ingrayo. I am an entomologist, and I run the Heroes to Hives program, which is the nation's largest beekeeping education program. We offer a 9-month beekeeping education program specifically to military families, so service members and their dependents. And we are celebrating our 10th year of that program.
Awesome. And we're super excited to have you join us today. And it's been really great working with Dr. Ingrayo. Just quick disclosures. I don't have any personal relationships for financial reason, nothing financially we need to disclose. All of the information and resources provided in this presentation is just some of what's available out there. It's not an all-inclusive list. It does not signify endorsement or approval of any of the organizations or companies or training that we might refer to. And reference from this presentation or from any of the information of services sponsored by the VA or non-VA entities does not constitute an endorsement. And this presentation does not constitute medical treatment or advice, and all participants in beekeeping programs should have approval from their medical provider to participate.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here and kind of just give us a short background on the history of beekeeping and therapeutic beekeeping for veterans. So beekeeping as we know it really didn't start until ancient Egypt. So when we think about beekeeping in general, especially in prehistoric times, what we're talking about is wild honey collection. And that's the picture that you see here. This is from a cave drawing in Spain that we believe is about 10,000 years old, of an individual climbing a tree and collecting honey from a hive. Now, here in the United States, really the beekeeping that we know, humans managing honeybees, started in ancient Egypt about 3100 to 2600 BC. And Egyptians were actually the culture that realized that they could actually manage honeybees for the collection of honey and wax. And so we pretty much have the lineage of beekeepers actually starts in ancient Egypt and is an unbroken tradition until now. In the United States, bees first arrived in the United States, honeybees as we know it, stinging honeybees as we know it, first arrived in the Americas in 1622. The United States and North America are not home to honey-producing bees, except for Melipona bees, which are stingless bees that are found in the Yucatan. So that is really the only honey-producing bees we had in the Americas pre-1622. Beekeeping as we know it, with the bees that we have currently, began in the 1850s when the Italian honeybees were imported into the United States. This also coincided with the development of the Langstroth hive, which is the industry standard hive that we use today. It was developed by Lorenzo Langstroth in 1851 and patented in 1852. As we move forward in time, we are going to jump to 1919. And Val, you can jump to the next slide here, which is where we started to see veterans and military personnel actually being recruited as beekeepers. So this started occurring in World War I when individuals were coming back from the trenches, and disabled veterans were actually being trained and promoted to them by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, being promoted to them to become beekeepers. And this was something very interesting at the time, because if we think about what was going on at the time, beekeeping was actually playing a very big role in the war effort. So things like sugar rationing was happening. And so honey fills that kind of need for more sweetener in the United States. In addition, the wax produced by bees was being used in covering munitions that were being sent overseas, and also the ropes on Navy ships were also coated in beeswax. So this was a really big effort in order to make sure that not only veterans were returning and having a career path, but also that continued national service. You know, I'm an Army veteran myself, and when I left the military, I wasn't done serving. And just like these individuals who were coming back from the trenches, many of them wanted to continue to serve the war effort, and beekeeping was the mechanism that we used for that. The individual that was responsible for the training of service members coming back from the United States was E.F. Phillips, who later went on to be a professor at Cornell University. And actually, there's a library named after him, the E.F. Phillips Library, which is one of the largest collections of historical beekeeping books available to anybody online. So we have a rich history of connecting veterans with beekeeping, both as a modality for a career path, but also this idea of continued service and these wellness benefits that we know come from beekeeping, but really there's never been any evidence to support that. Now, that's one of the reasons why we started Heroes to Hives, was because of my own personal experience of leaving the military as a service-connected disabled vet and finding beekeeping as the same mechanism that we knew from the early 1900s that we were seeing with E.F. Phillips. Our program was established in 2015. And like I mentioned earlier, we're a 9-month science-based beekeeping program. We're a beginning beekeeping course, a very robust course, about 100 hours of material that our students go through. Our students get an excellent education in beekeeping over those 9 months. And we provide this education free to service members and their dependents. So any service member that's worn the uniforms of the United States Armed Services can participate in the program for free, and up to 3 of their dependents. We also allow Gold Star family members to participate. And then all of you that are part of the VA staff, we also allow to participate in the course for free as well, in addition to veteran service officers, because we feel that the education that we're providing is something that you all could pass on to additional veterans that we want to reach with this training. In our program, we not only train individuals on the science of beekeeping, but we also provide them with therapeutic activities that they can engage in their own beekeeping endeavors and in their own apiary. To date, we've had over 15,000 students take our course. And this year we have registration closes February 28th. I should say that. So if you are interested in being part of the course, go to heroestohives.com and register. But we have over 3,100 students already registered for the course this year, and registration closes at the end of this month, with the program starting on March 24th.
So while the Heroes to Hives program was happening, we started a beekeeping program at the Manchester, New Hampshire VA. They started it in 2009 in collaboration with a veteran's wife who is a beekeeper and a beekeeping educator in the area. And we started it just as a way to teach beekeeping as a hobby, as a leisure activity, as a way to introduce veterans to beekeeping. But we were finding that there were so many more benefits to it than just a hobby. We were finding the mental health benefits. We were hearing that there were so many more things that the veterans were getting out of participating. So started to kind of look at information, and we'll get into that later in the presentation. But since then, this model is being used at a variety of different locations where we're really focusing on mental health, well-being, and beekeeping. So we have it in Manchester, Oklahoma City, Kansas City, Palo Alto, and we'll be spreading to at least 3 more facilities in 2025. And just this past October in 2024, I was a Shark Tank winner and a promising practice. And so we're having facilitated replication to the Northern California VA. So we are having assistance with the Innovation Network and Diffusion, and we are working on getting it spread out to there and going to have a really well laid out playbook of how to implement at new facilities. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what do you need to start a beekeeping program? If you're someone who is new to beekeeping and you're like, or you're someone who isn't new to beekeeping, but you're like, what do I need to in order to get a program like this started? That is what today's webinar is about. It's about what is needed and how do you facilitate and get some information about therapeutic practices into beekeeping. So I'm going to talk a bit about the equipment and supplies, honeybees, management, and then we'll also talk about safety, because these are the 3 big things when it comes to beekeeping. When you are starting to plan a program, you need to think about the equipment that's going to be needed. And you need to think about if the equipment is going to be used on-site or off-site. There are a number of VAs that have had success and are doing well having beehives on site. In Manchester, ours are on site. But there are some that are like, this is not going to work for us on site. And they are partnering with other farms or with botanical gardens or with apiaries to provide that education at an offsite location. So I'm just going to talk today about what it is that you need for equipment to facilitate a program. And then in a future webinar, we're going to talk about how to build those partnerships in order to have that successful program, whether it's on-site or off-site. So every beekeeper should have a bee suit, right? You need to keep yourself safe from bee stings. The VA in general likes to have the staff and the veterans dressed in bee suits so they're less likely to get stung. A smoker will absolutely help with that as well. It helps with bee management. It helps with moving the bees around. It helps cover up pheromones that the bees use to communicate. And then you also need hive tools. Hive tools allow you to pick up frames. They allow you to move boxes. Hive tools are a necessity. There are other pieces of equipment, but these are the big 3 personal, smaller pieces of equipment that you will need. So having a bee suit for each participant, 1 hive tool for every 1 to 2 participants, and a smoker for every 4 participants is pretty much what you'll need. Then you need a beehive, right? You need somewhere to keep the bees. Bees live in a beehive. All of the bees in the hive are called the colony of bees. Multiple beehives together in the same place are called an apiary. So the beehive, there are lots of different styles of beehives. This one is the most commonly used. It's called the Langstroth hive. It is the one that you see most of the pictures of. It has all the boxes that get stacked on top of each other. It has the frames that you pick up from inside and you can look at the wax and look into the comb. It has all of that, and it allows for different heights. It allows for different amounts of boxes depending on what the bees are doing in that season, how much honey you have coming in, how much they're storing in resources, or how small you want it if you're going into winter. So it gives a lot of flexibility, but the Langstroth hive has some limitations as well in that it is heavy. It is difficult to move. When you get those boxes, they can weigh 40 to 80 pounds depending on what size box they are and how much honey they have in them. So that's one of the barriers. The nice thing is that these beehives, there are parts of, well, all the parts separately are available on GSA Advantage, and we are working on getting some national vendors for getting bee equipment. and then local vendors. So they're easy to get, these parts. They're just not always easy to lift and move. And we'll talk about that in our third webinar when we talk about accessibility and getting everyone involved in the program. Then you need some bees, right? You need to keep bees in the hive in order for them to be therapeutic. You want to have bees and you want them to be alive. So one huge part about the Heroes to Hives program and also the VA Hives program is quality beekeeping education. And so it's really important for us to make sure that anyone who is facilitating or leading one of these programs has experience in beekeeping for multiple years and has overwintered hives for multiple years, or is partnering with somebody who has that experience and knowledge, because beekeeping is not easy. I'm not going to pretend that it is. There's a lot of things that make it hard. There's lots of pests, there's lots of diseases that bees have, and even this year there's tons of losses in commercial beekeeping that is just making it difficult to be a beekeeper. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, because beekeeping is so valuable, so connects us to the environment, keeps us connected to our community. So there's that value. But when we're thinking about bees, there's actually different different bees with different characteristics. And we just want to make sure that we are picking ones that are right for our climate. We want to pick ones that are right for the temperament that we want. Some bees are more calm, and other ones can be a little bit more aggressive. And you want to stay on the calmer side, especially when you're working with the bees with new beekeepers. But also making sure that you have bees that are going to thrive and have the right genetics to be able to survive winters if you have colder winters or drier seasons, or what's good for your area. And so we can help you to figure that out, to find the right bees, or to help you find bee suppliers in your area who can help provide those and get those bees too. When we look at the bee as an individual, I just kind of wanted to show you this because we talk about the bee colony, and that's as a big superorganism, and it's kind of like a large animal in and of itself. But then we have in the hive, we have anywhere from 10,000 to 40,000, 50,000 bees, depending on the time of year. And most of those are going to be our worker bees. And those are our female bees. But there will also be some drone bees in there who are our males. And then typically just one queen, and she is laying eggs and keeping that hive alive and communicating. So we won't get too much into the details about the honeybee because there's a lot of details. There's a lot of science to it. And we are going to have a number of videos and classes available at the end of the third webinar that you can access on TMS in order to get yourself like a general knowledge, or sign up for the Heroes to Hives program to get that knowledge. So we won't go too much into this. I just wanted to kind of just share like all of the parts of the beehive and what's in there.
And just to reiterate what Val said, yeah, it's a lot to learn. Beekeeping is not a simple thing to learn. Most of us are not organism, and honeybees are the only insect that we manage as livestock as humans. So it's something worth noting. Now, when we talk about like the management of bees, as Val was getting into, when we're managing honeybees, we're managing the superorganism. We're not generally managing the individuals like we saw on the last screen. We're managing the entire colony. And beekeeping is a year-round activity, no matter where you live, whether you live in a temperate climate or a cold climate. I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we've got 3 feet of snow outside right now. But during these times, we are still managing bees. It may, change on what the frequency is, but we are always managing bees. So let's kind of start with the seasonality of what we do during the season, different times of the season, and what we are actually doing with those bees. So let's start in winter, since it's winter right now. So really what we're doing in the winter months, especially in areas that we have actual winter where we get snowfall, is one of the things that we're constantly doing we're monitoring that hive entrance. And the reason that we're monitoring the hive entrance is we can actually quite a lot of information from the hive entrance. If you see dead bees out on the snow, that's an indication that your hive is alive. Bees do die over the course of winter, and they leave the hive to do that. So if you see dead bees out in the front, that's a great indication. But we also have to keep those entrances clear. So a lot of times you'll have bees that are dying over the course of the winter, and they'll actually start to accumulate on the bottom board of the hive. And we have to keep that entrance clear. So clearing those entrances of snow or dead bees during the winter is really important. In addition, we're also monitoring our food reserves. So bees thermoregulate during the winter. What they're doing is they cluster together and they consume honey as a caloric intake and then burn those calories to create heat. So they are actually thermoregulating in the colony. They don't heat the inside of the colony, they just heat this cluster that they stay at. But in order to make sure that those colonies are staying fed, we have to make sure that there's enough in the way of honey stores. And oftentimes that's something that we gauge as we're going into the fall. We say, hey, I want to have, say, for example, my area, I want to have about 150 pounds of excess honey on a colony in order to get it through the winter. But that's variable. Depending on how cold it is, bees consume more honey the colder it gets to stay warm. So they may blow through that honey quickly. And so we actually go out and monitor our bees during the winter to make sure they still have enough food. And the easy way to do that is you just crack the top of the colony. And if you see bees staring at you at the very top, means they've gone through all of their food, and we have to supplement through emergency feeding. So it's our responsibility as beekeepers to ensure that our livestock is fed. And I always love using the example, if you're a livestock farmer, say you're a cattle farmer, you don't put the cattle in the barn in the winter and just stop feeding them. That's not how we manage livestock. We are constantly managing this livestock and making sure they're fed, because that's our responsibility as a beekeeper. This is also a really great time of the year to clean or repair equipment. It's our time where we generally are building equipment for the next season. It's also the time when we're ordering things. So if you're ordering equipment or if you're ordering bees, that typically happens during the winter. For example, if you're buying what we call a package or a nuke, which are two ways that we purchase bees, you're going to need to order those usually in the winter, about 2 to 3 months before the season starts, in order to get bees for the season coming up. So these are things that we do in the winter. And it's always a fun time to try a bee related hobby or pick up a bee book or something like that during the winter as well. Now, in the spring is where really when the action starts happening. That's actually when we're getting into bees and actually starting to work bees. In the winter, you would never pull out a frame out of a bee colony. You're not doing any of that. You're just monitoring for food. But in the springtime is when the action starts happening. So generally, we want to wait until temperatures allow us to actually get into bees. If you pull a frame of bees out in too cold of temperatures, you can actually chill those bees and can kill brood that way, young bees that way. So you want to wait until we're getting into the warmer temperatures, those 50 degrees, low 60s, before we start working bees. Once it's warm enough and we can actually start pulling frames out, that's when you're going to want to check the status of your colony. So checking to make sure your queen's there and present and laying and active. You want to make sure that you're monitoring for food stores. So if you do need to supplement food, you can do it during this time as well. One of the big things that we do in the spring as beekeepers is we do what we call spring reversals. So the way that a colony works, you have this column. You can think of it as like a tree, but our beehives are essentially a column that is oriented vertically. And as bees consume honey, they move up in this column and they'll end up at the very top of the column by the end of the season. And so what we do in the spring is we take those top boxes where our bees are residing now, and we put them back at the bottom and put the empty boxes that were below them on top. And that provides the queen with space to lay during spring buildup. During this time of the year, the queen can be laying up to 2,000 eggs a day. And so she needs lots of space. If you don't give her space above her, what they'll end up doing is swarming. And so that's a really important part about spring management. And you need to anticipate colony growth. This happens very quickly. 2,000 eggs a day is nothing to shy at, right? That's a lot of brood going on every single day. And so we have to anticipate that growth. And we do that by adding extra boxes. We call those supers or supering when we're doing that. And that's another important part about spring management, but that's part of management all season, is maintaining space. It's one of the most important things as beekeepers that we do, is to make sure that we're maintaining adequate space for our colonies so that they don't get too congested, which is when we start to get ourselves in a swarm situation. We're also going to be cleaning entrances at this time of the year because your winter bees, which are your bees that last for about 4 to 6 months, depending on where you're at in the United States, those winter bees will start dying and your summer bees will start coming on. Your summer bees generally live about 45 to 60 days. So biologically, they're very different bees. And so you'll start to see bees dying during the spring. Those are your winter bees, and you're going to make sure they're cleaning those out. If you do have issues with your queen, this is the time when you're going to re-queen her to make sure that you have a healthy queen that's very vigorous going into the season. This is also the time of the year when we split colonies. So I had mentioned swarms a little earlier. That's when basically your old queen takes half the colony and goes and moves somewhere else. So you lose half of your bees when that happens. And we don't want that to happen. But swarming is a biological process. That's the reproductive process of the superorganism naturally. And so we have to participate in that if we don't want to lose our bees. And we do that by doing what we call splits. And that's where we basically take one colony and turn it into one or two, which alleviates a lot of the congestion and allows us to mitigate some of that swarming. But it also allows us to increase the number of colonies that we have sustainably in our apiary. Managing swarm behavior is something we do all spring because you have so much reproduction happening. It's so quickly. And so we're always managing space. This is also the time of the year when we start managing for mites, diseases, and other pests. And we won't get into the details of it today, but varroa mite is the number one pest that you're going to be dealing with as a beekeeper. I've been beekeeping for about 20 years. You will be managing varroa mite more than any other thing that you do in beekeeping. This is our number one priority right now globally, and has been since the mid 80s, is managing varroa mite. So a very important part about what we do is monitoring and managing these pests and pathogens. All right, moving into summer. This is when really things get motoring and when we start seeing honey come in. So all summer long, you're going to be monitoring for queen health. You're going to be monitoring your brood patterns, which oftentimes are an indication of disease or a pest presence, and colony health overall. So every inspection that you're doing, and you're going to be doing inspections every 3 weeks during this time of the year. You're going to be going into your colony. You're going to be doing mite counts. You're going to be looking for incidents of pathogens or any symptoms of pathogens, and you're going to be taking action upon those things when they happen, because we're dealing with a life cycle when it comes to honeybees of 21 days. So these things happen very quickly. So we have to act when we see these things happening. This is also the time of the year when we tend to see honey coming in. So generally, depending on where you're at in the United States, honey flows fluctuate a lot. But generally in northern climates, you're going to see honey flows anywhere from about, I'd say, late March, early April, all the way through the end of September. And they can change depending on where you're at. Sometimes you'll have consistent honey flows, and then you'll have what we call dearths, where basically the resources evaporate in the landscape and bees are, a little more stressed because there's not as much food. But when we do have heavy honey flows and there's a lot of nectar coming in, we have to add supers. And we add supers so that we can take advantage of that honey flow and make sure that they have a place to put it. If you don't give them a place to put it, they end up putting it in the brood chamber, and that ends up becoming a swarm situation later on. This is the time of the year, generally near the end of summer and in midsummer, where we start to extract honey. So actually taking excess honey from colonies, and we only take excess honey. We never take all the honey from a colony, because the honey is what bees use to live through the winter. So we always have to keep that on the forefront of their minds, is that honey is not all for us. That is the bees' food. We only take the excess. We also would be feeding during this time as well. So for example, here in northern Michigan, where I live, we tend to see what's called a dearth when there is no resources available, meaning that all the flowering plants have essentially stopped flowering during a period of time. We see a dearth where I live generally about the end of July through the second week of August. During that time, oftentimes we will supplement food by feeding our bees sugar syrup. And then this is also the time that we're going to be treating for mites. So mites, again, your number one priority when it comes to pest management. You are always going to be monitoring for them. And when you hit thresholds, and we'll talk about thresholds in the educational materials that you'll get after the webinar series, but we'll talk about what we use as thresholds, meaning how many mites per so many bees do I need to have in order to determine if I make a treatment or not. But that's something you're going to be doing all season as well. And then we're going to wrap it up in the fall. So in the fall, we're monitoring for food stores. That's a really important part to make sure your bees have enough honey to get through the winter, and that's all relevant to where you live. But if we do not have enough honey on, meaning that some of our colonies might be a little light going into winter, this is our opportunity to feed them. And we feed them a 2-to-1 sugar syrup recipe, which is 2 part sugar, 1 part water during this part of the season, because they store that food like they would store honey. So it actually becomes a food resource they can use during the winter. We're still going to be looking at mites. We're still going to be testing for them. We're still going to be treating for them. And it's really important because, and again, we'll get into the details of this in the series of videos after the webinars are done. But you'll see that really it's important because bees cannot physically survive if the mites are out of control. The mites compromise an organ in bees that is critical to overwintering. So if you have mites that are out of control, your bees will die. This is the #1 killer of honeybees in globally at this point, is mites. And so if you don't manage them, your bees will die pretty much 100% of the time. Requeening is a really important thing during this time of the season, because if you have a weak queen, you need to take care of her and make sure you have a strong queen going into winter and into spring. If you have weak colonies, they tend to really not do well going through the winter. So we oftentimes will combine them with stronger colonies. Here, you also need to start managing for winter, meaning we start putting entrance reducers on, so making the defensible position smaller so that the bee guards can actually protect their food. This time of the year is a time we call robbing season, so other colonies are trying to take advantage of weak colonies and will literally steal all their food for winter, and then you'll end up with a colony that just has nothing. So we basically change the defensible position to make a smaller defensive position by using entrance reducers. Mice tend to be a big problem during the winter, so mouse guards are another thing that we use. And so you're going to be preparing your hive for winter is also during this time, which also goes into like adding insulation. Some folks wrap their colonies. There's lots of different approaches to overwintering. And then finally, if you have excess honey during this time of the year, you will also extract during this time of the year as well.
So, as you can see, there is a lot of work that goes into beekeeping. It's not just simply having some bees in a box and letting them do their thing. There's a lot that has to happen, um, that has that you have to take care of. And then, if you're planning on having a program and you're like, yes, I want to have a program. We're gonna either go off site or we're gonna have hives on site. There's going to be a lot of questions of how are you going to keep the veterans safe? How are you going to make sure that no one is going to die from a bee sting? Because that is the biggest concern always that gets asked is how are we going to manage bee stings? And I will tell you that since 2019, so in the last 5 years of running this program, I have had veterans get stung by bees. I have never had a veteran or anyone at the hives have an anaphylactic response to a bee sting. That is a contraindicated um, diagnosis. Having a allergic reaction to bee stings, it kind of makes it so that the person should not participate in the program. So, but there are other ways to help manage and reduce the risks of bee stings. One is, like we said, to wear a bee suit. Our safety policy at our facility says everyone must wear a suit and have long sleeves, have pants on, closed-toed shoes, gloves, and a full veil covering their head. So basically covered head to toe. The bees can sting you through your clothes, and they might potentially do that, but this will reduce the risk of bee stings. I also, in our safety policy, have put in that if any of the roads and grounds staff want to wear a bee suit while they are mowing near the hives, or I guess if they want to wear it anytime when they're mowing, they're welcome to, and I will provide that suit for them to wear. I have not had anyone come and request one, but they are aware that they can, and I have not had any of our roads and ground staff be stung while mowing by the hives. They literally just drive past them on the riding mower. The smoker is another risky area. It is another safety concern. We have a ash bucket that we keep down at our hives because basically you are putting in dry material into this canister. You are lighting it on fire and then you are letting it smolder and you are puffing it with the bellows to get smoke into and around the hive. So you want to make sure that you are being careful when you're doing that because it gets hot. There is a cage around the outside of the smoker. So you do need to provide appropriate education to the veterans and any volunteers who are helping out with the program, not to put their fingers through or hold underneath the smoker because they will get burnt. And we have had that happen where we had a participant burn their fingers on the smoker. So making sure you're going over the safety of using the smoker and how to use it properly and how to light it safely are all very important things. Then when it comes to the honey, right, we are bottling the honey. We are extracting the honey from the comb, we are putting it into buckets, and then from the buckets, we are putting it into bottles, capping it, and distributing it. So as you can see in this picture, we are following our food safety guidelines. Everyone is wearing a hat or a hairnet and gloves as well to reduce the risk of spreading any diseases through the food that we're providing. There's lots of questions about stinging insects and bees on site. I've been called a few times to see if my honeybees were trying to move into the buildings. They only were once. Uh, but basically, there's a lot of insects out there that have stingers. There are lots of insects out there that look like bees, but not all of them are bees. So there are hornets, there are yellow jackets, there are wasps that all have stingers. They are rather aggressive and they can sting. All of these insects can sting. Honeybees and bumblebees are the bees. They are less aggressive. They are rather cute and fuzzy. And just know that if you are the one who is facilitating a program, you might get called to be asked, hey, is this your bee? What do we do about it? And there have been times where I'm like, that is not my bee. That is a hornet by an entrance. Do what you need to do about that. And there have been times where they're like, there's a honeybee trying to check out this area, where I was like, oh, yep, there is. And we put up swarm traps to help give the bees a different location. And it could have been our bees, but it could have been somebody else's bees because bees will travel up to 3 to 5 miles to gather their forage. So that it could be our bee, but it could also be somebody else's bee. There's no guarantee that it is our bee. We also want to make sure we are keeping our honeybees safe. We want to make sure that we are doing the best we can for these animals and for these creatures and livestock that we are raising and that we are taking care of and that we are being responsible for at our site. Bees are live animals and should be treated as you would any other animal, just like a pet that you have, just like any animals that you might have on a farm or any chickens that you have in your backyard. Maybe don't move your bees into your house, but still treat them with medication. If they need medication, if they need food, provide them with food. Do the best you can to provide them the best living experience that they can have and to keep them alive as best you can. They need food, they need shelter, which we've talked about. They need medication if they get sick or if they get too many pests and mites on them. And they also need protection. The bees in my area need to be surrounded by an electric fence. We have bears in New Hampshire. We have bears at the Manchester VA. We have pictures of the bears at the Manchester VA, but they did not touch our beehives because we have an electric fence that is up and around them. And there are signs that say electric fence, do not touch. So in order to ensure for the safety of the honeybees, if you're not an experienced beekeeper, you want to partner with a beekeeper with at least 5 years of experience, preferably someone with a master beekeeping certification. So this will ensure for the best experience and the most safety for your honeybees, but also the best and best quality education for the veterans that you're teaching about beekeeping.
Let's talk a little bit about the historical context of therapeutic beekeeping. So, this idea of using honeybees as a modality for personal wellness is not something new. This is something that's actually, I think, a recapturing of the historical perspective of humans as it pertains to honeybees. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the traditions that have kind of led up to, and some of the inspiration, I would say, that's led up to a lot of the work that Val and I have been doing around therapeutic beekeeping. So let's start back in ancient Egypt again. So in Egyptian traditions, bees were actually viewed as a gift from the sun god Ra. They were literally an extension of Ra. And so they were highly revered in Egyptian culture, so much so that the pharaohs in the 31 dynasties of ancient Egypt, the pharaohs of Lower Egypt, meaning the Giza Plateau, where the Great Pyramids are and the Sphinx, they were all known as bee kings. And when you look at the cartouches of these particular pharaohs, every single pharaoh that was associated with Lower Egypt has the bee in their cartouche to denote that they are the rulers of Lower Egypt. In addition, priests were actually who were the individuals keeping bees during this time. And so it was a very, very controlled industry and something that was highly revered within the culture. Moving into Celtic tradition. So as we look at Celtic traditions, really the Celts kind of embodied this idea of bees being an intermediary between the world of the dead and the world of the living. And bees actually were flying bees were actually seen as the souls of individuals who had died previously. The picture that we see down here at the far bottom right is The Widow by Charles Napier Hemy. And the reason that we have this picture in here is that in Celtic traditions, and this is still stuff that's practiced today by some traditions, when a beekeeper died, it was the obligation of the family to notify the bees that that beekeeper had passed. If you didn't do that, a swarm would occur, or you'd have a terrible honey harvest the next year. There would be consequences for not involving the bees in the things that were happening within the family. And so bees were a very important part of these familial connections and were literally an extension, an ability to kind of extend yourself into the world of the dead by communicating with your bees. They also had traditions called telling the bees, where beekeepers would actually go and tell the bees about things that were going on in their lives, the struggles that they were happening, major life events. This was the responsibility of the beekeeper to engage their bees with. Slovenia is another culture that is highly involved with this idea of bees being this kind of a therapeutic medium. And this is till today. I had the pleasure of going to Slovenia last year, and throughout Slovenia, apitherapy is something that is practiced very widely and is an extension of healthcare within this area of Eastern Europe. Bees are seen as healers, and bees are constantly being viewed this way as a culture overall. So in Slovenia, they have the highest proportion of beekeepers per population. 1 in every 200 people is a beekeeper in Slovenia, and it is an absolutely amazing culture. But what you see here in the bottom left is one of the examples of apitherapy, which is air therapy. In this situation, this individual is laying on top of a series of aja hives, which are the Slovenian traditional hive, a little different than our hives. She's laying on top of this, so getting vibrational therapy from the bees who vibrate in the note of C. And then also her head is at a mechanism that allows her to breathe in the bee air, which is seen in this culture as something that helps with respiratory problems. So people with asthma, this is how they go and get treatment for these types of things, is through this. They also do things like honey massages, where you actually are massaged with honey to help with skin conditions. In addition to that, sting therapy, so venom therapy, is also used for things for like arthritis, MS, and all sorts of other ailments that people are dealing with to help with the symptoms associated with that. So a rich culture around the world. And this is just a very brief look at what cultures view bees as when in this therapeutic context. Now, the therapeutic beekeeping practices that we have developed as part of Val's Hives program and the Heroes to Hives program, these are practices that are rooted really in this idea of connection to the natural world. So nature-based therapy, and really connecting to the cycles of nature, becoming a steward and reconnecting through stewardship of nature, also providing an opportunity to show gratitude. So gratitude practices and being grateful for what nature has given us. exploring the interconnection between ourselves as humans and the natural world, and really starting to understand that there is a world beyond the self. One of the things I think that as veterans, speaking from my own experience, we oftentimes get wrapped up in the self and the things that have happened to us, the traumas that we've experienced during service, during combat, these types of things. In opening our eyes to the world beyond and this idea that nature can interact with us and be a healing modality is something that's very powerful for a lot of people. So working beyond the limits of personal identity to really engage in a deeper way with our bees is really what we're talking about, this connection to nature. And we do this through things like service and generosity. So the idea of continued national service, which I mentioned earlier, this is something that really resonates with veterans. When we talk about beekeeping, we're talking about not only being stewards of honeybees and connecting with them, but we're also talking about the ability to continue to serve your nation after you've taken off the uniform by protecting the most important managed pollinator on the planet, which is responsible for a third of the food that we eat. So building that connection between the idea of being a beekeeper and continuing to serve is something very strong within the veteran community. Being able to show gratitude. That's one of the things that we oftentimes struggle with, is recognizing that we should be grateful for the gifts that are given to us, and bees give us a tremendous amount in the way of gifts. Refining our personal awareness. So trying to take ourselves from outside of that ego and bring ourselves back to this interaction within the natural world and being a participant rather than someone that has dominion over the natural world is a way to refine that awareness. Cultivating wisdom. I think one of the most powerful things that we can give veterans as service providers is the idea of wisdom and empowerment. Providing an education to somebody, giving them the tools to become knowledgeable about a subject matter like honeybees. I cannot tell you how many thousands of veterans that have gone through our program that once they have the knowledge, they feel empowered and they want to continue to share that. And so cultivating that wisdom, giving them kind of that jump start, and then they just take off with it, is an amazing thing that we see with a lot of the veterans that we work with. Redirecting motivation. As service members, we're always, having to be highly motivated for a mission and really showing that motivation, whether it's self-motivation or motivation through a unit. But redirecting that motivation to honeybees allows you to really focus on something. And not only that, be accountable to something, because I think that's something that we lose when we get out of the military, is the accountability to our unit that we have. Now we have accountability to an organism that we have to show up for and is relying upon us. And then helping us manage emotions. One of the most powerful things about honeybees that I have experienced in my own personal life is when I'm having a bad day, when I've had a tough day at the office, going out and sitting with my bees and just being present with them can oftentimes allow me to manage those emotions that I'm dealing with in a constructive manner, and feeling like I have a cohort of individuals that I can voice my troubles with, work with, that are not judgmental. These are bees that are here for me and I'm there for them. So overall, what we're trying to do is improve mental health through a lot of these mechanisms and just kind of this reframing of the mind and how we interact with this organism. And let's talk a little bit about the therapeutic practices that we have developed and that we are working collectively on. So these are practices that the VA and Heroes to Hives, Val and I have worked together to kind of meld together and shape into a formal program that you are all starting to participate in today. And so the practices that we've developed are things like breathing and grounding practices. So, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to incorporate practices that are already used in a lot of different fields, but bringing them into the beekeeping realm. So simple breathing exercises, guided imagery. So, guiding ourselves through what it's like to work through a beehive, what we're going to experience. Sensory exploration. So talking about the senses and how they're stimulated by different aspects of the colony. Yoga for beekeepers, a great way to incorporate people into movement therapy, but also in the context of preparing yourself for this physical activity that we're about ready to engage upon, which is working honeybees, which oftentimes is very physical. So preparing the body for that. Creating and crossing a threshold. So creating these defined areas within an apiary where we literally are taking ourselves from one space and moving into a drastically different space. So taking ourselves from the physical world that we normally work in and going into that world of the apiary where we're focused just on our honeybees. Bee bathing. Forest bathing is something that I'm sure most of us are familiar with. And so this is an adaptation of that for our working with our bees. So actually sitting and observing and just noticing what's going on with honeybees. Communing with bees, and this comes from the Celtic tradition of telling the bees. Communing with bees is a great way to deal with things that you oftentimes are not comfortable voicing to other folks. And you all know, as individuals that work with veterans, veterans are sometimes asked to do the most heinous things on the planet and then have to live with the ramifications of those traumas for the rest of their lives. The ability to commune with your bees and voice those things to your bees without judgment, without fear of judgment, is a really great way to kind of just get past a lot of those traumas that we have. Active meditation while working a beehive, physically working a beehive, but using that breath, maintaining a slow, methodical movement, and really doing an active meditation while we're working bees. And then steps of gratitude, an opportunity to show gratitude for an organism outside of ourselves, gets us outside of that personal ego and really allows us to explore the gifts that are given to us from the natural world. All right. And so this is really kind of where we're at, is this idea of all of this information we've shared and bringing it together into a cohesive therapeutic beekeeping program. And that's what Heroes to Hives and the VA Hives program has really worked on. And when we started talking about this, when Val and I started working together, oh gosh, I guess it's been 6 or 7 years ago, we know just from our program, from all the assessments that we do with our students, that there's just this tremendous amount of anecdotal evidence of veterans saying that this is solving all of my mental health issues. Anxiety and depression are gone. I have a less sense of isolation. But there was absolutely no research to support that. Nothing in the literature, in the peer-reviewed literature, to show that. But we know that animal therapy is a well-established intervention. So we really felt like we could do something to kind of show that beekeeping could actually be established as an evidence-based therapy.
So that is what we are working on and have already been able to publish some information and some data from a quality improvement project that I completed in 2022. This article was published in the Therapeutic Recreation Journal this past October, and it demonstrates initial outcomes of a very small group of veterans who participated in the Hives program at the Manchester VA. And so the goals were just to improve their skills, quality of life, improves self-esteem, but also decrease feelings of isolation, connect with communities, and increase coping skills. We evaluated the evaluation was the EQ5D5L, which measured mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain and discomfort, anxiety and depression, and then an overall health score on a scale of 0 to 100. And what we found was that on the mobility scale, we actually found that there was a significant change in a negative way. We found that the veterans from the beginning of the session, when they did the first evaluation to the second part of the session, was that they actually had a decrease in their mobility. So we will talk about how we can address that in our accessibility talk in April. But we also found significant changes in anxiety and depression. So we found that there was a 30.9% change, which is a very significant amount of change um, that was that we are like, oh, we need to explore this more. Overall health scores also had a significant change. So that's where they were rating themselves on a scale of 0 to 100. So I did just want to share this because this is the first publication of the benefits of therapeutic beekeeping for veterans in a peer-reviewed journal, and it is kind of where we're gonna take it from here, is to continue to explore what these benefits are. Oh, that's me still. Sorry. Um, so, um, what we found was, like as I said, the therapeutic beekeeping interventions reduce anxiety and depression. And then to address the mobility issues, we need to decrease the mobility, increase access to different styles of hives and adaptive equipment. We also need to do more research to see if we're finding the same results outside of the VA at programs like Heroes to Hives or other training education programs for veterans. And also we determined that professional training is needed for clinicians and professional beekeeping educators, which is why we are here, as to provide you with this information and to start that conversation about how to start a program, how to run a program, and how to replicate this program and how to facilitate it in a therapeutic way. So if you are interested in replicating the Hives program, we are expecting that you're going to have that quality beekeeping education, that you will have therapeutic beekeeping practices, the ones that Adam just discussed a bit with us, that our hands-on beekeeping experiences are going to be accessible to everyone, both with their any physical limitation and with any mental health adaptations that are needed, whether it's spacing of hives, whether it's being aware and cognizant of how PTSD might impact someone. And then we also are going to have assessment and evaluation as a part of the Hives program.
And we do have our schedule here for the upcoming webinars. Our next webinar is on March 19th and then on April 16th. And then we do have our 2-day in-person training at the Manchester VA, June 25th and 26th of this year.
You need me to go to the next slide. Hang on, sorry.
No problem. And these are some of the resources for VA Hives that you see here. If you are a VA employee, there is the SharePoint Drive, the Diffusion Marketplace that anybody can access. And then Val also hosts a best practices monthly call the first Thursday of each month at 1 p.m. And then you can see some of the education partners here. Heroes to Hives is our program. Mission Believe is a program located in Maryland that is a partner of ours. And then the Great Plains Master Beekeeping Program through the University of Nebraska is also a partner program that we work with as well. And there is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to either one of us. For those of you that are external to the VA, I'd recommend reaching out to me, and probably those internal, reach out to Val.
But really, either way, we'll both answer you. I did
Absolutely.
put another poll in the chat just about whether you are planning on attending the next webinars and if you're planning on attending the hands-on training. So that is a 2-question. If you hit the little arrow button, it'll go over to the next one. So feel free to complete that survey and then poll, and I'm going to put one additional poll in the chat as well. I just need to find it. But in the meantime, while we're doing this, does any I want to go to the last slide here. So this is we do have a USDA SARE grant, which is helping to fund this training. So if the hands-on training is at no cost to anyone to participate, so we just need to put that up here. But does anybody have any questions as we kind of wrap up? Feel free to unmute yourself. The last poll I'm going to put in the chat is if you're willing to give us any feedback over a phone call. We would love to have your feedback, because this is a grant funded program and we do need to provide that information and gather information like that, but it also helps us to provide better trainings in the future. So if you answer yes to this poll that I'm putting in, it will record your name and I will just download it on an Excel sheet and we will reach out in the near future. But I would really appreciate it if anybody is willing to just share their thoughts on the training with us to help us as we continue to improve what we are providing for education.
Just a note, Valerie, their names are not going to appear on the poll.
Oh, okay. They will not appear on the poll. They won't.
So ask them to contact you.
Oh, or you can reach out to me. Yes, or that. Thank you.
And we only have about a minute, but you have 3 hands. So if you'll go ahead and take those. So LK has the first one.
Okay. I don't know how to see the hands, but LK. Linda, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
And if not, just go ahead and go to number 2, and they
Okay.
can see their numbers and ask
Jonathan,
him.
go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi.
I have had a question running through my mind as far as the treatment for mites or beetles or moths. It's a fumigation process. So with the fumes from that, is that going to affect the honey at all?
Adam, I'm going to let you take this one because you are the expert on this.
Yeah, Jonathan. So it depends on the chemical that's being used. So we have a suite of chemicals that can be used in honeybees. Some of them are organic acids. Some of them are fully chemically produced products. It just depends. Some of them will accumulate in honey and actually contaminate the honey. And that's why it's really important when you're using a mite treatment to read the label, because that is a legally binding document from the EPA on how to properly use that treatment. So things like formic acid, which we use, do not accumulate in the honey, but things like amitraz does accumulate in the honey. So it just depends on what treatment you're using. You have to, as a beekeeper, that's part of your responsibilities to make sure you're using the right treatment during the right time. And those treatments that do accumulate in honey, those are generally only used in the off season or when honey is not being produced or not being stored by the bees. So we do have some that can accumulate, but most of them do not.
Okay, thank you.
And I answered Linda's question in the chat. She asked if we have experience working with veterans with spinal cord injuries. And yes, we both have experience working with veterans with spinal cord injuries. And yes, there are adaptive equipment that we can use to help them to get into beekeeping. And Daniel, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, do you have resources, advice, guidance, handout on dealing with the naysayers or the doubters to the value of therapy on the ELT level? In my region, we have 2 hives that they want me to take over. So I've started the education process, but they're already saying no. And it's not going to even cost them anything because it's a takeover. It's already 2 hives up and running, and they just need somebody with skills and training. So that's basically what I'm looking for. A lot of disbelief in rec therapy in general. A lot of, yeah, that's foo-foo for a whole health. We can't focus on that right now. We're tightening our belt. And could you guys come over to Cheyenne and give a live presentation to ELT so I could win this kind of argument? Thanks.
Yes. So Daniel, I have a 1-page handout. I can also get for you a presentation that other facilities have provided to their ELT to basically sell the program. And we can also talk about if it would make sense for one of us or some of our veterans to come and talk about their experience with beekeeping and the therapeutic side of it. And just so you know, the Visit 19 Clinical Resource Hub is also part of the Hives program. So the Visit 19 is already on board. So Cheyenne should also jump on board. I wrote down your name, but can you shoot me an email, and that way I won't forget to send you that info? Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, Valerie. So thank you, and Adam, thank you very much. And thank everyone for joining. We've run just a little bit over, but if anyone has any questions, please reach out to valerie.carter@va.gov. So with that, we'll see you guys next time, and have a great day.
Thank you all. And we'll get the next information out for the next event for registration for that.
Thank you, everybody.